have that patience. You also need to have that curiosity. You don't want to feel like asking questions is a bad thing. As a designer, as a product designer, you need to be okay asking as many questions as many times as you need.
Where exactly do you think designers can find this kind of data which can help them in their designing process?
Always be careful like where you're getting information from, because we do live in the world of information right now. But there are so many like really highly skilled individuals, designers who have channels on YouTube, and they are giving you really good solid information. Key things to consider when you are designing across devices is, for example, your navigation patterns. How are users moving across your devices? This becomes like really important, and they think they need to design for everything. They really don't. I've never worked at an organization where you have to design for everything.
Hey guys, welcome to Better Engineering and Management podcast. Today we have Isra Tabassum joining us to share with us how designers can utilize data to create better design making decisions. Isra has around 10 years of experience in design. She is passionate about user-centered design and is currently serving as lead product designer at Skyral. Isra, please welcome to the podcast.
Everyone, how's it going? Thank you for having me, Pradeep. I think it's going to be a fun session.
Sure, thank you. So, Isra, tell us how exactly can designers utilize data to take decisions during the designing process?
Yes, let's drill into the details. So I'm just going to share my screen,
Sure.
and you'll see my screen. I'm going to be facing this way, so apologies anybody watching this. You'll just see like my horrible profile now. Okay, so data driven UX. I just want to. You've done a wonderful job doing an introduction for me, but I also want to just highlight some of my experiences. So I am a self starter, which a lot of designers will find themselves to be. Especially when I started, there was no such thing as formal education in product design or UX design. So I am actually self taught. I come from a print and design background. And then eventually I moved into web and product design. So in my sort of the last 15, 16 years, I've lost track how long it's been now, but in my last 15 years, I've worked with over 300 clients. And I've worked with clients like Vitality, Unilever, and Ministry of Defence, and more. But just to give you an understanding of my experience and, you know, the level at which I try to work at and the kind of clients that I work with.
Sure.
A little bit that makes me more human is I have a bit of a sweet tooth. I am absolutely obsessed with baked goods, especially if they're chocolate. So if you ever want to win me over, chocolate is the way to go. And I've got two wonderful cats that I absolutely adore. I've had them for about 15 years now. So yeah, that's a bit about me. Moving on to what you asked. So, how can designers utilize data during the designing process? Now, this is a really wide question, okay? So, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill down into a few of the points that keep coming up. So, so the first thing you want to look at is how you can understand your users using that data. So, most people think that actually when you are doing that discovery process and when you're analyzing data or using data tools, it has to be super complicated, it has to be super sophisticated. It really does not. You basically are the lead. You have to take charge of your data, and it does not have to be complicated. Like, I've pasted some of the screens from some of the client work that I've done more recently, so you can see like our user personas. This is the one on the left, the screenshot that you see on the left here. That's our user personas at the moment. Yes, when I have the time, I will make them into those beautiful cards that you see. And this data will be more accessible than it is right now. But sometimes that's all the time you get. But as a designer, you need to prioritize that data, collecting that data, but also having that data available. So for example, for this particular client, we've got all of this in a mirror board. Why mirrors?
Okay.
Because it's easy to access, it's all in one place, and everybody who's on the board knows that the top bit we're going to ignore, the bottom bit we're going to go with. So it's just through the various iterations. So this also is showing you the iterations. And on the right here, Again, you see a more refined user journey map. Yeah, when you have the time, let's make it look pretty, but honestly, it does not have to be complicated. So one of the first things you do is get to know your users. You should have access to like at least workshops that you can carry out. So a lot of businesses don't have any data that you can dig into. I
Okay.
come from a background where uh, I was always the first designer there. Nobody's even thought about UX before me. So
Okay.
sometimes when I go onto a company, they don't have any analytical data that I can access. They don't have any
Mm-hmm.
feedback surveys. So you're almost starting from scratch. You're the one that's going to start collecting this data.
Okay.
Now
And
that's yeah.
Isra, can you just zoom in on a bit of that mirror board? What exactly is the data that you have collected?
So I cannot. So the reason why this is zoomed out is on purpose, is because this is under very heavy like NDAs.
Okay, okay,
I can
sure.
talk
Okay,
through what I've yes, but I'll
sure.
tell you what's collected here. So we've got your traditional persona card information. So we've got the name of
Okay.
our persona, what we've called them. We've got information about them. I believe in these two. So we've got like demographic information. We've got like their job titles and stuff like that, and then we go into what their pain points are, what motivates them, what do they like, what do they don't like. Behavior becomes really important. So one of the things we're going to talk about later is, for example, devices. One of the things we're going to discuss later. So that's why you want to record all of this in your persona card. You want to record like what kind of technology they're comfortable with, what their day to day looks like, what motivates them, what puts them off. And if your product already exists, you can also include things like what they don't like about your particular product. Whereas if you're in a position where, I have been in the past where the product doesn't exist, the data doesn't exist, so you're collecting all of this from start. So some of this becomes irrelevant because you can't ask a user what they don't like about a product when the product doesn't exist. But what you can then, as an alternative, ask them is competitor products, like what kind of products they've used and what they probably don't like about those. That also
Okay.
gives you like a really good starting point for like that product fit,
Okay.
market fit type of research. That's slightly different territory, but you can include as much information in that persona card as you want.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, my apologies. Some of this stuff has been kept blurry and like zoomed out on
No
purpose. So I
worries. Okay.
apologize for that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I've named some tools here. Hopefully, the businesses nowadays, a lot of these businesses are becoming very user centric. So they do often have, at the very least, some qualitative information that you can dig into, like surveys or some user calls and whatnot. So during your discovery, that is the most important kind of data that's going to be coming in. Whether it's qualitative or quantitative, that's what you got to use. You need to absolutely understand your users. Now let's move on to the second most common, at least in my career. I'm not saying this is industry wide, but in my career, this is the second most common thing that comes in during your design process, where you absolutely should have data. Now,
Okay.
this is where you're validating your assumptions. So, as designers, we can go through the entire design process, sometimes without speaking to users, and it happens. I've worked in defense. Sometimes you don't get users that you can run tests with, right? But you still have to figure out like how are you validating some of the design assumptions that you've made. It becomes really important
Mm-hmm.
for the success of the product. Um, so one of the notes I've put here, actually, very quick note. So if your organization doesn't have the right tools in place, you need to introduce them. So in that case where I was in defense and we didn't have users, one of the things I
Mm-hmm.
did is I introduced like micro level testing at component level,
Mm-hmm.
proxy user testing. So those are some of the tricks that you can still apply where
Okay.
you are struggling with the traditional methods of testing that they might teach you, like I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
on the wide web or your university level or whatever. But yeah, so validation is super important. So for example, a simple way to do this might be A/B testing, or again just one-to-one user testing sessions. So you want to go through those entire journeys, make sure that all of the risks have been thought through. So
Okay.
that's the second most important place where you want to be using all the data that's available to you, or finding information that can back up your design decisions. The third thing where data is super, super, super important, and this is like if you take nothing away from that top section, this is the one that you really want to take away, is how you're going to communicate your ideas to stakeholders. Now, when we consider stakeholders and businesses, they speak a completely different language to us designers, right? You
Right.
have to be able to explain to them the changes you're making, why you're making them, and how they impact the business. So, for example, this is a couple of slides from a feedback report that I created. This is years ago. And so in here, one of the ways what we did is we pasted in our prototype. So this was like a wireframe that we created, and we ran user testing, and then we talked about some of the stuff, the feedback that we got. And when you run your sessions, you will end up doing like this thematic analysis, where you find out what people have consistently talked about like throughout. So you'll find as you run the sessions, like after about 3 or 4 sessions, the same patterns start emerging, the same complaints start emerging. So you do like this thematic analysis kind of way. So then what you do is you consolidate all of that, and you're able to create like a nice slide like we have here, where it's
Sure.
literally like 4 or 5 points that people continue to complain about. And so we explain what we found, like per section, per screen. We did that for the entire app. But then you also want to communicate your intentions. That's really important. So during playback, it's really important to get the entire team on board before you've even started work. Why? It gives a chance people to feedback. So your stakeholders
Right.
may have really strong feelings about particular sections. So in this particular company that I was at, stakeholders had really strong feelings around one of the sections that we had introduced, and this was communicated early on, and therefore we were able to work through that. So you want to give your entire team, including stakeholders, plenty of chance to feedback. Feedback is always good. As a new designer, you kind of start taking feedback very personally, but feedback is really, really good. Every criticism that you get helps you become a better designer, helps you design a better product. So always welcome feedback with open arms. So this is one of the ways to do it. You have to get really good at communicating uh, to your team, to your stakeholders.
Okay.
Um, your question.
Interesting. So what I understand is what you're saying is like, you know, there are multiple implications of having good data. Basically, first thing is like you should go to the Miro board. You should kind of define personas, and Miro board is just an example. You can use any tool and kind of come up with all the information that you want. And after that, the second piece is like designing all the users. Basically, in cases where there is no product, you should kind of do research like how are they using the competitor apps? Are they happy with that? Are they not happy? And then that would also help you a lot. And the third point you mentioned is like communication, where communication is very important because once you have some ideas about the things that you want to create, uh, and the stakeholders may have slightly different ideas from you, and they might be very strong, they might be holding to those ideas very strongly. So you should be very good at presenting your ideas and convincing them, which means you should kind of be very prepared, well prepared with your kind of data. Just as you showed, you can create some slides and some presentations and kind of put your strong points there, and you can also put some prototypes here, and that would help you kind of communicate to the stakeholders why you are taking certain decisions. And so data is not just helping you make decisions, but it's also helping you kind of communicate your decision making process to other stakeholders. Okay, very interesting. Okay, and
Absolutely, because
okay,
the data is no good if it's not accessible. Always remember that, especially as a new
okay,
designer. Data, if it's not accessible, it's no good to nobody. So
sure.
you being able to analyze and communicate that data becomes very
Mm,
important. It's actually a very important skill to have as well.
okay,
Um,
okay,
there was something
interesting.
else I was going to say, but I forgot.
Sure. So Isra, you know, when it comes to like data around organizations like revenue reports, profit and loss reports, right? All that data essentially tells that where that organization stands right now, right? In terms of revenue, in terms of all those things. But when it comes to designers, right, the data is supposed to be used for more like kind of increasing the aesthetic appeal of your products, making products look more appealing, and increasing the brand maturity of the product, right? Where exactly do you think designers can find this kind of data which can help them in their designing process? And what should be the attitude of the designers? What perspective they should develop to kind of utilize this data?
Yeah, so it's a very common misconception that as a designer, that your business goals can't be this, or that you're fighting against the business with the goals that they're trying to achieve versus what the users want. I think that used to be the case where businesses wanted something else and users wanted something else. But actually, again, one of the skills that you absolutely need to have as a designer is being able to marry the goals together. Because ultimately, as an organization, you are there to serve the users, and your CEO, right through to like your junior, they will say the same thing. We are ultimately building for the users, right? So it's
Sure.
actually the reports do matter. Yes, the P&L reports matter. The impact of what you're doing matters. So going back to that communication side of things, you creating a feature, great, well done. You created a feature. What impact did that have? That's what you have to be able to answer. And we'll get to that in a minute. So one of the things I want to start with is actually hearing the pain points from the horse's mouth. Now, who are the horses here? The horses actually are your users, but also your stakeholders. Now,
Okay.
one of the things that you have to get really good at is being able to tell a good story through these pain points. And you have to, again, communication, communication, communication. You have to be able to tell a compelling story. Your stakeholders, your users will happily tell you everything that they like or dislike, not just with the app, but also within like the process or how the app works like end to end, and before using the app and after using the app. They will tell you all of that detail. It's you need to capture that. This is a really bad screenshot, but again illustrating how simple this can be. So run a workshop. This is a screenshot from one of the workshops that I ran in the past, and this is not the entire screenshot. I've had to block some of it out. But what we did was we started capturing and we started color coding everything that we were hearing. So, for example, in the red, we put like all
Mhm.
the pain points that really frustrated users, and then the yellow was some of the ones that were less frustrating. So however you do it, just make sure that you are aware of that data. You are aware of what the business wants, and you're aware of what the
Okay.
users want, and you're able to then connect the two, right? So
Mhm.
in terms of one of the things you mentioned was where to find that data, how to marry it, right?
Right.
So that's where your product mindset comes in.
Okay.
Being user centric, being business centric are two different things, but product
Mhm.
combines the two, right? So
Okay.
you need to be able to align the business goals with the user goals, right? What does ultimately the bottom line is business wants to make money.
Right.
How do you translate that? User engagements, right? So, for example, retention, user engagement, some of the things you mentioned earlier. As a product
Mhm.
designer, you want to show the impact, for example, of brand maturity, or you want to show the impact that, oh, we're now engaging more users or we're growing more users. But what does that mean in terms of the business?
Mhm.
All of that means is that you're making the business more money, full stop, right? You just have to be able to illustrate that. So,
Absolutely.
for example, yeah. So, again, one of the notes I've put here that I was saying earlier that you're not fighting against the business, you're in the business corner. Your job is also to help marry the two. Um, so yeah, so one of the screenshots I want to share here is here at one of the organizations we had a few data platforms in place already that was collecting information for us in terms of like the responses that we were getting, and you can see like how we showed that month after month we were getting more users, people were more engaged. This was all great, but that also meant the business was doing well. We were making more money. So this particular company,
Mhm.
we were able to translate all of this into money, and that's how leadership teams actually sell the ideas to, for example, your C-suite.
Okay.
So going back, I'm just going to click one more because, okay, going back. Okay, so for this particular company, actually, do you remember earlier I was saying that there was this feature that our CEO was absolutely not happy with, but we had the data, so we'd done the research, and we knew that the users wanted that particular feature. But also, the business was paying £5 per user to be able to collect that information within that biography feature that we then later introduced. So before that feature was introduced, we were paying £5 per user. We grew by 150,000 users. So now multiply £5 by 150,000 users. When we introduced that feature, we saved the business almost £1 million.
Wow.
So
That's
that's
really
how
amazing.
you, yeah, so that's how you translate the work you're doing versus
Okay.
the impact, right? You have to be able to illustrate the impact, and
Okay.
that's how that's the power of data, right there,
Right.
basically.
Okay.
And so yeah, so some of this, like, it just shows that it's great if you have platforms in place and you can collect information like on here. So for example, we were able to illustrate, you know, factually illustrate that we're getting more. For example, here it says responses, right? So we're saying more responses paid out and more responses accepted,
Mm-hmm.
and how many responses are coming in, and the correlation between the two, our app store, how well was it doing, because all of these, we included all of these data points because
Mm-hmm.
of the different parts of the app that we were working. So for example, one of the things we did for this particular company is that we completely upgraded how they looked on the app store,
Okay.
because that we identified that during discovery, we identified that as one of the bigger blockers for people signing
Sure.
up. After we unblocked some of those things, we doubled in our user base. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you need to have that product mindset.
Okay. So basically, what I understand is like there is a designer's mindset where you are very much into the aesthetic appeal, increasing user engagement, and all the things. And then there is business where they eventually all they want is money, right? That's the whole idea of creating a business. And then there is a product mindset which is marrying both of them. But the product mindset is not just for product people or product management people. Designers should also be very kind of aware about this. They should not be so much trapped into their design thinking that they don't worry about business. They should have this product mindset where they should ask this question, like using this design, how it will translate into business value, right? And this is where the data can help. And I also understand that measuring data and kind of uh, can be very useful because you might be living in vacuum where you're not aware that how this particular user data is translating into business. And this is where when you measure things, you get an absolute idea, and you can also save money, as you just mentioned, right? Because the amount of money that you can spend per user, since you don't have complete visibility, can be very high. But once you get that visibility, you can kind of save that cost. So, that reminds me, Isra, like nowadays there is a lot of impetus on tracking user data, the number of clicks that they are doing, the amount of time they're spending on particular screen, what attention they are giving to which particular screen and all. So, so how much value do you think that data has for designers? I mean, should designers worry about all that, and they should worry about more instrumentation of that kind of data?
Yes, all data is good.
Okay,
The more the merrier, basically. So
okay,
one of the things data helps you do is also prioritize, right? So the more data you have, the more of a stronger case you can make around what you're building, around the details of the around the details of the functions or the features, what should get shipped first, what should get shipped last. So this is where we now go into here. So qualitative data versus quantitative data. Um,
okay,
so this should actually say quantitative data. That's my bad. But anyway, so your question: how does all this quantitative data come in? Actually, quantitative data or qualitative data on its own is just going to give you half the story. So, for example, story time here. So let me give you an example because I didn't have like good screenshots, but I'm gonna tell you guys what happened once. So one of the companies I was working at, we through quantitative data we knew where people were dropping off. We knew
okay,
where the conversion wasn't happening. So
mm-hmm,
what the journey should be is that we expected people to receive a notification, click on that notification, land on the app, and then from there they were supposed to convert. The action was supposed to convert. So I believe the
okay,
action at the time was that they were supposed to then click into a survey. So that was the action. So that would have been that the expected journey that in our heads. That's what we had built, but that wasn't happening.
mm-hmm,
And we knew that quantitative data. We had Pendo in place at the time, so Pendo was telling us where people were clicking and where people were dropping off.
okay,
But at that point, you're just like, well, we don't know why that's happening. So that's where your qualitative data comes in. So this was discovered during a dog fooding phase. So dog fooding, for
okay,
those that don't know, this is one of the ways that you can continue to test just before launch. So when your app is like near ready, you introduce it to like super users or internally, basically use it to like a smaller group of people, the live app itself or the live product, and you get them to use it so you can actually collect data in situ or in context.
Okay.
So during our dog feeding, we realized that people were dropping off. The journey wasn't working as it wanted, and then we actually started speaking to the users, and then we found out that actually the links that were being pasted were broken. And this was not due to an admin fault. This was due to a technical fault. For some reason it was not embedding the links properly, and the users weren't getting to the right screens, which we didn't know. We had absolutely no idea that actually people were landing on a dashboard screen rather than a more relevant screen to the task or the survey where we were expecting users to go into. So actually, as a result, we then had to uh, take that as a bug, as a tech bug, and we solved that eventually. But quantitative data on its own would never tell you that. You can
Interesting.
you can
Okay.
see, yeah. So you on quantitative data, like for example, let's imagine a heat map. A heat map shows you like how far along somebody's gone, where they may have clicked, but there is no definitive way of knowing like why somebody has clicked where. I was literally sat with my dad a few days ago, and he was trying to set up his Google profile, and he's 65 plus, so this is where like your accessible design really comes in. At 65 plus, he sat there and he's trying to follow through that journey, but it was so confusing to him because of the language that it used. And this is Google, and we know Google do a lot of research, yet
Right.
it was confusing for myself and for my dad because they kept interchanging the words like sign up,
Okay.
and I think he was trying to between sign up and create an account. It was just really confusing. But also, what was happening is that throughout at one point in the journey, he was supposed to, I think, link his account or enter his email address, but then he kept getting this pop up in the corner of the screen, and that caused distraction. So on a heat map, that would show you that we had clicked somewhere, but I don't know whether that would show you like whether there was a pop up or not. And unless you speak to the users, you don't know what's triggered that action. And a pop up
Interesting.
isn't like the best example because
Okay.
a screen like on a heat map it does capture that. But
Mm.
sometimes why somebody has clicked or what that thought process was, you're never going to know that from quantitative data on its own. So yeah, the two always. Yeah,
Okay.
the more data the merrier, but quantitative
Mm.
and qualitative you should have like an equal amount of the two.
Okay, that's very interesting. Basically, people of different ages and different languages may be kind of processing the same when they're on the same screen. They may behave differently. They may find the same information confusing because of the language. And let's say if they're not too much into using internet or using browsers, and they're doing it for the first time, or they use internet, let's say, lesser than compared to other people, all of that information can also be very daunting for them. And if there are too many pop-ups coming here and there, and they will keep getting distracted. So but these things will never get captured into heat map, because heat map will simply take how many clicks you're doing, what kind of attention you are paying, and the fact that you are getting distracted because of pop-ups or the language itself, because sometimes you're saying sign up, sometimes you're saying create account, sometimes you're saying register. And so both qualitative and quantitative data have their own merits, and one cannot kind of rule the other. And as you mentioned, the more data, the merrier. But we have to be very cognizant of the fact that qualitative data cannot serve the purpose of quantitative, and vice versa. And this is very interesting. And you also mentioned about dog fooding, where you said like if you use your own product, a live product with your own use cases, that can also uncover a lot of issues before the product has been released. And I believe it's also becoming an industry practice now, because wherever I have worked, people have tried to use the app for themselves first before kind of releasing it to the customers. So that's also a very interesting point that you brought up. So yeah, that's very interesting that
Just
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I was going to
Mm,
say, just before we move on, one thing I do want to add. So
mm,
data is good, right? And I know I've said the more the merrier. Great.
mm.
But what does that mean as a designer and as organization? Are we saying that you should have all the data in the world? No. So we're not. I'm not. What I'm not suggesting is that you need to have all the data possible in every single shape and form. No, you're and I think that we talk about this a little bit later, but one of the things that you have to be careful of is like what are you trying to solve and what data do you not need to solve that problem. So I don't want people watching this and then going off to the organization saying, oh, we need Google Analytics and heat maps and we need like Pendo and VWO and all these other platforms of user testing and everything that exists. Like I'm not saying that you need to have everything under the sun, But what you do need are the right tools to help you figure out the problem that you are solving. You always work backwards. You always
Okay.
you always, as an organization, as the product team, you figure out what problem we're solving and what do we need to solve that problem. So that's one thing to just be a bit mindful of. Yes, data is good,
Sure.
but let's not go crazy because not everybody has the budget to have like everything under the sun.
Right. Interesting. So yeah, the more data, the merrier. But you also mentioned that, what is the problem you're trying to solve? If you focus on that, you'll automatically know where to get the data that you actually want. And you also mentioned that the journey of the user, right, is very important because the journey cannot be captured using quantitative data, right? There is a kind of a steps involved in during different steps of the journey. Different behaviors will be expected. So if a designer is cautious about it and he tries to capture data with this in mind, probably he will know what exactly, where exactly to look for, and how exactly the thing should be tested also, so that they don't get lost into the quantitative data essentially. Interesting. Cool. So I think there is a lot of consumer behavior and patterns also involved here because, and as a designer, probably it's a good idea to kind of worry about those things also. Uh, yeah. So the next question I wanted to ask you is like the number of screens is increasing, right? Earlier only we only had computers. Now we have computers, laptops, televisions, even smart watches, right? And iPads and all those things. And the behavior of the apps and the websites is pretty different in all these screens, right? So how should designers worry, kind of take care about their design making process so that they can accommodate for different screen sizes? And what are the challenges involved in creating a design for so many screens these days? How would you solve it? And yeah, good.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, especially because of like the day and age we live in. So I'm actually really interested in this one. So I think one of the mistakes that people make is again they think they need to design for everything. They really don't. I've never worked at an organization where you have to design for everything. I'm sure, like for example, if you're working at somebody like the BBC, you are probably touching all of those different devices, right? But even then, there are always priorities. So, for example, going back to this example of grape data, like we knew that mobile was our priority over desktop. And then we knew that even between the larger screens, tablet was lesser priority over desktop. So you kind of have to, again, have that data. At the time we had Google Analytics and we were able to see what devices people were using. We were able to see what the most common size of that device. So, for example, on mobile phones, you have various different mobile phone sizes nowadays. I mean, forget any other medium. If we just consider one medium, you've got multiple sizes across that medium. But then, a platform like Google Analytics very quickly consolidates all of that for you, tells you, or actually, your users are using this particular size most for whatever reason. You know, you will see that from sector to sector, these vary. Especially my most recent experience, for example, is in B2B, and in B2B, for example, everybody uses desktops. And everybody has like your standard like MacBook size ish laptop, so you generally know what size of a
Okay.
screen that you need to design to. So yes, you need that data, what mediums people are using, what sizes within those mediums people are using. But
Mhm.
generally, you kind of the way my rule of thumb is that you kind of design to the smallest of that size, that
Mm.
category of sizes that users are using, because the larger ones, they're going to work across the next breakpoint. That covers it. So when you cover from breakpoint to breakpoint, you don't have to design every single screen size.
Sure.
Your developers are usually, the engineers are usually quite good. They don't need every single screen size. You just kind of design breakpoint to breakpoint and then cover the smaller
Okay.
sizes. Basically, you cover the most awkward designs. You
Okay.
solve the awkward designs, and everything else in between figures itself out. Because like coding nowadays is like so amazing, and engineers, they do a really good job. And if the job is done
Okay.
really, really well, you'll see that the design is fluid and it works.
Sure. That's very interesting. So what you're saying is like most of the time you will not be dealing with a lot of screens because any kind of organization, the kind of product they have will be suited for a couple of screens, but generally it won't be the case that it, unless you are a company like you mentioned, right, BBC or something, where each and every device is touching your app. But I think you mentioned also that there are still challenges because even in the phone itself there are multiple devices, multiple screen sizes. But with the latest technologies and smart engineers, they're easily able to handle all this using responsive design and all those things. We don't have to worry about those things. Probably the good thing you want to do is to kind of do a small research like where are your users going to be using your app most of the time, and design for that particular screen sizes. That research should help you, and that's what you should prioritize before kind of jumping onto the implementation.
I was going to say, in product design, prioritization becomes everything, right?
Okay.
And we keep using this word priorities, but again, data really helps you figure out what to. Even if you're considering features, for example, like what feature do you roll out first? What device do you roll it out on first, and why? So yeah, I think these things become really important when it comes to priorities. So after we do the prioritization stuff, like we
Mm,
can then go into this. So okay, so the second half of the question you asked me, complications that come with different
mm,
devices, right?
right.
Again, this is a very wide topic. Everything that we've touched on generally is a wide topic, but some of these
Mm,
topics are like really wide. So what I've tried to do is I have tried to point out the key top three key things that keep coming up for me in my career, and hopefully
mm,
you'll see the other designers will see the same patterns. So key things to consider when you are designing across devices is, for example, your navigation patterns. How are users moving
okay.
across your devices? This becomes like really important. So for example, on a mobile app, again going back to our great data case study, on the mobile app we had the menu at the bottom, but actually then on the desktop you've got more space. So where we had like these two-tier navigations happening on a desktop, you can see that's all happening on the same screen. And why do I use the word patterns? Because this all then eventually becomes part of your design system. And from a design system point of view, these patterns start to become really important, because then you're talking about scalability, you're talking about maintenance of that design system. And also I use the word pattern is because then you can apply the same patterns across other parts of the app. This is good practice because users learn how to move through your app. You can't have different patterns for each part of the app, because then it gets really confusing. Uh, Even the most junior designer listening to this call will understand that yes, for as good practice, you want to have consistency in your design and the patterns. So that's the
Sure.
one that catches you out quite quickly when you work across like various devices. You need to be careful of the navigation. You don't want deeply nested journeys, especially on mobile. Actually, even on desktop, you don't. Full stop. You don't want deeply nested journeys. So your navigation becomes really, really important. The information architecture, right, becomes really important. Number two is you need to consider input methods. So across devices, the devices themselves give you multiple ways in terms of how you can interact with the devices and what you can and can't do. So, for example, a mobile would let you speak to the mobile, for example. So you can
Right.
search via speech.
Mm,
On mobile, you've got touch, you've got gestures, whereas a desktop may not let you do that. So when you design, you need to consider these things for every aspect that you design. And I've used this example of a tooltip. Sorry, it's chopped off a little bit here. But a tooltip is such a simple component that we take for granted. But then if you now try and consider how this might work across devices. Now, let me ask you: when you think of a tooltip, how do you envision the interaction?
okay.
You'd envision like a hover, right, on a tooltip. Generally, a lot of people I've seen on various apps, what they do is on hover. So you'd imagine if this was us using this particular app, you would hover on the pin and the tooltip would appear. But then actually, if now we were applying this to a tablet or a touch screen, in this particular case, our clients, they were not only using desktop, they were using massive touchscreen TVs for presentations.
Okay.
So then, how does the app translate on the touchscreen?
Mm,
So you have to be mindful of those. So for example, like on here, you on this icon, you would put a click action rather than a hover action, so that
sure.
it has so that journey is consistent throughout the devices. But then you have like other actions. So this X is a bad example because everybody knows what an X is. But where you've got other icons where it's not quite obvious, instead of having a tooltip that explains what that action is, you would have like the name next to it. Again, good practice so that the icon translates well across devices. So on a mobile, it's not just a random icon. You still on a mobile can read like what that icon is. You're not dependent on a hover action or a tooltip to tell you what that icon is supposed to be doing. So it's things like that you
Sure.
have to consider, when designing for interactions.
Okay.
So the other thing that you have to, again, data and priority, right? I think this is going to become a theme for our entire session today. Feature availability. So I remember when I first started designing, remember I did web first. One of the first things that we used to throw away were background pictures. So on a desktop, for example, you might have like a huge space. You can have like a nice background picture that helps strengthen the branding, but then you'll have like your message over on the right or whatever. On mobile, you don't have that luxury of space. So one of the first things I used to go was like these background pictures, and then you just prioritize the message. And again, like if you look at the apps that you use, there are certain apps that do this really well, with, of course, contextual data in place. They understand how their users are using different devices. They know, so for example, in Instagram's case study, we know that Instagram know that their users on a mobile behave slightly different to how their users behave on a desktop. So they've prioritized how their apps function, the features that are available based off of that behavior. And these are the kind of challenges that you'll come across when designing across devices. And this is where, again, your data comes in really handy. Hearing it from the horse's mouth comes in really, really handy. What are people actually doing, across these devices? One of the clients that I worked for, one of the things that people needed to be able to do is they needed to be able to take pictures, but then also edit and upload those pictures. But we found that the users were actually doing the editing and uploading on desktop rather than on mobile. On mobile, they were actually only just taking the pictures, and they were just grouping the pictures. So we were able to then design for those functions. Now, I'm not saying that always you need to choose between features. So it's not a case where on desktop you can do this and on mobile you can do this. That might be a solution in some scenarios, but generally what you do is on desktop you can do this really, really well, and on mobile you can do this really, really well. So that's how you prioritize your features, so that it's not an overwhelming challenge as designers, but also not an overwhelming experience or a useless experience for users. Because if you're not going to be, for example, in my client's case, if you're not going to be editing the images on your mobile, then that's not a function that you want to see prioritized and block your journey. So yeah, just those few things that I think keep creeping up, are most common in my opinion, or in my career rather, that I think are important to highlight here. Yes, so I was just going to add to what you were saying. This bit here in my little fake post-it note. So it's not always about what features work better on what screen sizes. Yes, that's a factor, but also what do the users need? Remember, we
Sure.
always tie everything back to the user needs or the business needs, and both. So it's all, you got to have that context. So
Okay.
if users, for example, going back to that client, so if users had told us that they absolutely need to edit the images on mobile, we would have made it work, right? So then that's as a designer, you're solving that problem. How do you provide that editing functionality? In Instagram do this. On Instagram, you can do so much on your phone. They have like the filters and whatever not that you can do on Instagram. It's not like it's an impossible challenge to solve. It's just, in my particular client's case, the users didn't care about editing. They were more careful about the getting that data, so that photographic data. So this is in the context of like site visits. So if you imagine like a health inspector or somebody like that, for them it was more important to capture that data and have like some kind of a grouping or a record of like what they were capturing. Editing was secondary. That's when they put it into their reports. That's when editing and adding notes and stuff like that became important, and they used to do that on desktop. So I just want to add that to what you were saying.
Sure, understood. That's very interesting observation. I think all the PM should also take note that when they are designing or planning their sprints, right? If they're planning which features to kind of prioritize, probably screen sizes can also be one parameter, and usability of the app on that particular different devices. Interesting. Okay, that's very interesting point actually. So yeah, it's coming back to our last question. Like, what are some of the pointers that you would like to share with the new designers so that they kind of change their game and become great designers?
Yeah. So when it comes to sort of data, again, this is a really, really wide topic, but I'm just going to share the three that I think are super, super important. I think you need to always see yourself as a researcher. You always need to be asking the right questions. You need to always be curious. You need to be asking things like, where are users dropping off, why are they dropping off. I think they say there are like 5 stages of like why, so you ask like why 5 times before you actually get to the root of the problem. And you need to have that patience. You also need to have that curiosity. You don't want to feel like asking questions is a bad thing. As a designer, as a product designer, you need to be okay asking as many questions as many times as you need. So the first one is just always be curious. Think of yourself as somebody that's trying to solve a puzzle. Um, and the next one is you need to own your craft. One of the mistakes that, especially when you're starting out, you kind of end up relying on your line managers to, during your PDPs or whatever systems you have in place, you kind of end up relying on them to help you get your career on track or set goals or whatever it is. But actually, as somebody who's self-taught, one thing I would always say: if you want to get good, you need to own your own education, and there are loads of free resources that you can do. And even if you're interested in a course that costs, do your research. Think about the value that this particular course might add to the business, and take that back to your line manager and say, hey, I've come across this course that I think the organization could really use. I want to upskill. Can you put a case forward so we can get a budget for this course? A lot of organizations have some kind of a budget in place. However small or large, they often have some kind of a budget. And if they don't have a formal budget, you can always negotiate a budget as long as you can prove the value. But even if you can't, like I said, there are loads of like free organizations that you can go to. So, for example, the University of YouTube. Always be careful like where you're getting information from, because we do live in the world of information right now. But there are so many like really highly skilled uh, individuals, designers who have channels on YouTube, and they are giving you really good solid information. So if you can trace back their authenticity, their credentials, go to YouTube, listen to those particular
Sure.
designers. You've also got platforms like edX and NN Group. You get tons of really good like free information. edX especially, like you can like I've done a course by Harvard on edX completely free. I think I did like an accessibility course on there. So edX is really really good. I'm pretty sure they still have like free courses on there available. If not, they're not very expensive. So yeah, there are loads of places that you can go to. But yeah, manage your own career essentially. Don't wait for somebody else to guide you. We live in the world of information. Find a path for yourself. You also, one of the things that we touched on earlier is you need to be able to communicate your idea. You need to be able to sell your idea. Don't forget, at the end of the day, you do need those sales skills. You are a bit of a salesman. You need to be able to, again, going back to think of yourself like a researcher, think of yourself like a scientist. You need to be able to learn quick and fail quick. You need you need data to back up your recommendations, and it's the only way you're going to convince somebody. Again, then going back to that storytelling aspect, once you've got the data, you've got your case, you need to be able to present that case in a really well way. You need to be able to translate the impact. Those are like some key stages that you need to be able to essentially sell your idea. Or I mean, it's what users want and what the business wants and blah blah blah, but you're owning that idea. It's your idea. That ownership also needs to happen. So you do need to be able to sell your idea. So those are some of the key ones that I would say as a new designer. You absolutely need to nail. Even if you're a new designer, you need to consider yourself as the leader of your craft, as the leader of your expertise. Continue to learn, continue to own your designs, be active in your career, basically.
Sure. That's a great, whatever you mentioned I think all the newcomer and new designers should take note of these things. Basically, you should own your craft. You don't depend on others to kind of set goals for you and guide you. Be proactive. Go on YouTube. Try to learn some new courses. Even if you have to shell some money from your own pocket, that should be fine. Or if the organization pays for you, even better. And kind of, you also have to become a bit of a salesman. That also you should learn from the beginning, because every time you come up with an idea, generally those ideas are not like normal product ideas. They are design ideas, and you will have to sell them. And you should be a bit of a salesman, not exactly pushy, but you should have the skills to convince your stakeholders. And as we discussed all along, you can use data to kind of convince stakeholders, like, okay, these are the patterns, these are the user-centric data that users will definitely find useful. And whatever Isra has mentioned all along, you can use that data to kind of convince stakeholders. And of course, be creative. As Isra mentioned, right, you take these activities like you are trying to solve a puzzle. And in fact, that's what exactly you're doing as a designer, right? We're trying to solve this puzzle of getting the best product out there, right? Isra, it was a great discussion, very insightful, full of wisdom. And I must say, all the viewers would be watching it will be learning something from this conversation.
I
Thank you for
hope so.
having, yeah, thanks for sharing all the information, all this knowledge that you have. Thanks for your time. Any last words, and
And
then we can wrap up this discussion.
yes, firstly, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I really hope that the information has been useful. I know I do tend to waffle a lot and I do tend to talk a lot, so I hope that viewers listening, are able to dissect the key information. But also feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And yeah, hopefully, until the next time, Pradeep.
Sure. Thank you, Isra. To all the viewers, do subscribe for many such amazing conversations lined up. I hope you are finding these conversations very useful. Do let us know in the comments also what you think about these conversations and what more you would like to learn. Where should you focus more? Thank you. Have a nice day. Thank you, Isra. Have a nice
Thank you
day.
so much. Bye.